So this novel in some ways is about the power of art, but also maybe the limitations and the and what it can achieve, and sometimes what it can't achieve, but maybe the value despite that.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
All right, so this is chapter 8 from my novel. For those of you who don't know, my novel is set in 412 BC Sicily. After Athens has invaded the island of Syracuse, they have been catastrophically defeated and thousands of Athenian prisoners have been thrown into a limestone quarry. But all is not lost, because some of the Syracusans actually love Athenian theatre, especially the work of the playwright Euripides. And they decide that they're going to put on a production of Medea. But they want to do it properly. They want a chorus, they want masks, they want costumes. So our heroes, Lampo and Gelon, Lampo's the narrator, are going to Alecto, who is the #1 costume designer in Syracuse's home. There's only one theatre shop in Syracuse. Not really open to the public, but Alecto, your one who owns it, lets us in on account of an old friendship with my ma. The shop was her husband's, and they ran it together until one day he disappeared. This was about 20 years ago, and I was just a kid at the time. There's been no sight nor sound of him ever since. All sorts of rumours abound. But my favourite is that she killed him and used his skin to make props for the plays. And yeah, this isn't even the strangest thing about Alecto. The strangest thing is that she kept the shop. There were 3 other costume makers in Syracuse when her husband disappeared, and the owner of each offered to buy Alecto out, or even better, marry her. She was a stunner in her day, but to both proposals, business and matrimonial, she said, no thanks. It was her shop and she'd run it, and besides, she believed her husband would return someday, and what then? Though I've heard that when she said this, there was a curious lilt in her voice. Anyway, she kept her shop and never remarried. Within a couple of years, Alecto's was seen as the best option when it came to fashion and all things theatrical. In 10, it was the only option. She'd driven all the others out of business. I knock a couple of times, but then Gelon pushes and the door swings open. The house is a sprawler, 4 stories including the cellar, yet it seems even bigger on account of all the theatrical gear. You can't see the real walls because they're covered with scene paintings from different plays. To my right must be Olympus, rolling clouds and gorgeous sunbeams, thick and gold as honey. To the left are the battlements of some citadel, probably Troy. Blood streaks on the lime-washed brick like gashes in pale skin, and tiny archers in the towers. It's so well done. I'm almost nervous walking past it. Like if I don't leg it, I'll go the way of Achilles. Straight ahead is the best scene of all, Hades, the river Styx to be exact. The water green and trembling, with faces and limbs rising. It reminds me of those statues at Victory Gate, but it's more beautiful than even them. The light on the water is different from any I've ever seen in this world. And yeah, it seems I know it. Gelon says that's what the best plays do. If they're true enough, you'll recognize it, even if it all seems mad at first. And this is why we give a shit about Troy, though for all we know, it was just some dream of Homer's. And I walk towards this green soul river, and for a moment, it's like I'm going home. Thanks.
Thank you. The basic scenario of this novel that you detailed there is hinted at in a passage from Plutarch, The Life of Nicias.
Yeah, exactly.
A biographer of the commander of this failed Athenian invasion. And Plutarch writes that Athenian prisoners in Syracuse managed to save themselves by quoting lines of Euripides, who was, I guess, the most popular dramatist in Sicily at the time. When you read that passage, what about it? How did you know it had the makings of a novel-length work of fiction?
Yeah, I always knew I wanted to write something set during this war. I was always fascinated by ancient Greece. I studied classical studies. And so the Thucydides was a big inspiration. So Thucydides writes this chronicle of the 27-year war between Athens and Sparta. And at the heart of that, you have the Sicilian expedition, which was this completely unnecessary imperialistic invasion of Sicily. But in a sense, the whole war is lost in Sicily. So after Athens invades and fails to conquer Sicily, a good portion of its young men are dead. Most of its ships are destroyed. Most of its money is gone. And after that invasion, Athens ceases, it's a cultural power, but it ceases to be a very dominant political military power. I knew I wanted to write about that. Didn't know what form it would take until I read Plutarch's passage from the life of Nicias. And there was just something about, I suppose, the juxtaposition of cruelty and empathy. So in many ways, art is about empathy. We imagine the lives of characters other than ourselves. Often we understand people, or we really begin to understand people often through their stories, through listening to their stories. And yet, at the same time, they were leaving these Athenians to die. We will save you, but only if you've got Euripides. So there was kind of an interesting contradiction there that I wanted to explore.
Was it that sense of like a waning empire that attracted you to the Peloponnesian War? It feels like a very sort of 21st century resonance there.
Yeah, I think it is. It's also, what's interesting about, if you read Thucydides, it's written 2,500 years ago, but it's almost like the first work of like reportage. Like, for example, I'm writing, my next novel that I'm working on at the moment is set in the Middle Ages. And if you read history from the Middle Ages, almost always there's a divine explanation for things. This bad thing happened because that person was a sinner, or they committed this act of sacrilege. The supernatural abounds. Whereas one of the things that really struck me in Thucydides is that there is no divine explanation. You almost have a sense that Thucydides might be an atheist, or at the very least an agnostic. He's very skeptical, and it felt very contemporary. He's always second-guessing things. He's always looking for another version of events. He's always looking to corroborate. So in a way, what drew me to it was the way that it felt very recognizable and urgent, and yet in the midst of it, you've got slaves, and you've got, triremes. So it was that blend of the familiar and the unfamiliar.
Yeah, I feel like what will probably strike readers of this book on the very first page is, of course, the contemporary speech that you're using. Unlike many or most historical novels, you're not going for a vernacular that would be contemporary to the characters at the time. In fact, it sort of feels like the characters are speaking as though it were Dublin in 2025. Was it always your intention to write in that style?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yeah.
I think it was. So there's a few ways that you can do it. Like very often, if you write a work of historical fiction that's set 100 years ago or 200 years ago in the English-speaking world, we know how to recreate that. You pick up a Dickens novel or a Jane Austen novel, or a Melville, and you can, you do your research and we can reproduce that. But if you want to set a work of fiction in 5th century BC Sicily, I'm not going to write this in Doric, ancient Greek.
Well, why not?
Why not? That would be I think we'd have a smaller crowd. And even then we wouldn't really, because all we really have are like essentially the records of the elites. So even then, we don't really know what like an everyday, average person would speak, or how they would speak down at the pub or down at the taverna. So it's an act of translation. It's an imaginative translation. If you get that. So I feel like if I'd written this novel and the characters had sounded like they were in Downton Abbey, people would be like, oh yeah, he's really done his research.
Yeah, totally. For some reason, we always default to like British as sort of like an ancient sounding English. It did remind me of like every now and then you'll come across a translation from, some point of the 20th century of an ancient text, and the person will have like randomly rendered some characters in like Cockney slang or something like that, just to sort of give it a contemporary feel. But it's very effective in this book. For a healthy stretch of the book, anyway, it's what we might call a backstage drama, as this pair of friends work to stage their production. Do you have? Were you like a theater kid? Do you have personal experience with the theater, or was this more of a flight of fancy for you?
It was a mixture of both. So I was always passionate about cinema, really, really into film growing up, and I love the theater too. I never acted. I lived in Paris for a few years, and I had friends who participated or organized an amateur theater group that they called the Montmartre Dionysia, and I used to help out a little bit there. So I've seen the backstage, attempt to put on a show that doesn't always go very well.
This novel is obviously about a heroic age, but it distinctly lacks heroes or really many characters who sustain our sympathy, I would say. The Athenian prisoners are pitiful, but they're imperialistic invaders. The Syracusans are sympathetic insofar as they defend their island, but then they imprison the Athenians in basically this equivalent of an ancient world death camp, more or less. Were you consciously trying to undermine this sense of heroism that we commonly associate with the ancient world?
Yeah, a little bit. I wanted to... there's an interesting Tolstoy quote where he says, the best stories aren't good versus evil, they're good versus good. Now, I don't know if these, as you say, these characters are good or heroic, but I feel like they're flawed. Some things that they do are good and admirable, and some things that they do are despicable. Sometimes they're cowardly, sometimes they're unexpectedly brave. I think they're very human. And I think your sympathies, you can understand, you might feel sympathy for the Athenians, but yeah, they essentially arrived with the aim of conquering the island. And if they'd been successful, it's very likely Lampo and Gelon would be dead or enslaved. So I think I wanted to tell a story of characters with all their flaws. I was also aware of the fact that very often with ancient Greek set stories, first of all, most stories set in ancient Greece aren't actually historical fiction, they're just mythological retellings. And I can really enjoy those ancient Greek I love Pat Barker, I really enjoyed the Madeline Miller stories. But they even when they reframe from a different perspective, they're great, but they're myths, and they're myths very often about princesses, gods, goddesses. And if it is a work of historical fiction, it will usually be about Alexander the Great or someone like that. So I was aware that I wanted to come at this from a different angle, like the silent majority, the potters. I mean, pottery was such a huge industry back then. A significant portion of the ancient Greek population would have worked in that trade. About half of the population of Athens were probably enslaved. So I wanted to just, bring ancient Greece maybe as it's not typically represented, but actually as it was largely composed.
Yeah, the presence of slaves in the book is really interesting. Was that, I got the sense from your discussion of Thucydides there a minute ago that was maybe like a primary attraction for you, but I was wondering if that maybe became more important as you got deeper into the story.
Yeah, I think for me, what's interesting, let me see. So even though this book is set thousands and thousands of years ago, I'm a believer that the human mind hasn't really changed. It's the same operating system. And that's why you can pick up a Thucydides book or a Euripides play, and so much of it will still be very, very resonant, because the kind of basic emotions are pretty consistent. However, culture has a massive impact. Technology has a massive impact. And that juxtaposition of something that I might read, or you might read and go, oh, that rings true, I really understand that. That means something to me. And then something that's completely alienating, like the fact that there's just a slave. And that people don't question it. Mm-hmm. So almost like Aristotle is seen as this kind of bastion of morality, but he never really questions the idea of slavery. He actually says slavery is natural. in his books. So even the most educated, seemingly rational ancient Greek of his day couldn't imagine, a world without slavery. And I think that blend of the kind of human drama that's consistent, and then the thing that just seems a complete anathema to us is really interesting in historical fiction.
Maybe the most fraught relationship in the book is between Lampo and Lyra, this Lydian slave girl that he becomes enamored of and tries to court, essentially. And the power dynamic there is completely twisted and very difficult to navigate. How did you manage to navigate that?
It's really romantic, isn't it? Stick with me and I'll buy your freedom.
Yeah, I'll buy you.
Yeah, completely. So there's as you spoke to, the power dynamic. Lampo falls in love with Lyra, who's the slave girl who works in his local pub or taverna. And yeah, there's this power imbalance. This he can never really know what her true feelings are, because can she ever really express them? She's enslaved. She's lost her freedom. And one of the things about ancient Greece as well is Lampo is someone who likes to flaunt his power. So he's very proud of his status as a free male citizen. So the ancient Sicilians and ancient Athenians had democracy, but it was only for the male civilian population. So women couldn't vote and slaves obviously couldn't vote. So Lyra's a slave, yet it becomes very clear in any of their interactions that she's actually a lot more sophisticated culturally. She can speak many languages. She can read and write in many languages. He cannot read or write. And he's both trying to exert his dominance, and yet on the other hand, he's fallen in love with her, and he also tries to belittle her. So he's a very flawed character.
Yeah, that alternation between kind of poetry and cruelty that seems at the center of the book is right there in their relationship. I mean, even that first date they have is one of the more sort of awkward moments where he's sort of almost verbally abusing her in one breath and then exalting her poetically in the next.
I wouldn't introduce him to your sister. Yeah, he's not.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's a keeper.
Sicily is in this a colonized island, constantly at odds with its more powerful imperialistic neighbor. Not to traffic in stereotypes too much, but a lot of the book takes place in a tavern. Is this novel really about Ireland or Irish life?
Yeah. No, it isn't. I mean, I think what it is that you take what you in one way, this is completely lots and lots of research, flights of imagination within the gaps of history. But in another sense, obviously, there's definitely the resonances of Ireland as an island that had been colonized. Dublin is the largest city in Ireland. Syracuse was the largest city in ancient Sicily. It made sense to me that, in the way that Hiberno English, you have little hints of the native language that play underneath and the turns of phrase and the structures. That was playing into my mind. Athens is the largest maritime empire, the way that Britain would have been. So it's not that it is Ireland, but I'm using those breadcrumbs or those resonances to give the reader a sense of this distant past.
I'd like to speak about your writing life maybe in a more general way for a minute. I'm always curious about debut novelists, first-time novelists, that journey from kind of daring to dream about being a writer to seeing one's first book in print. When did you know that you wanted to be a writer, and did you ever doubt that it would happen for you?
I always loved reading. I was always a voracious reader as a child. I loved narrative, whether that was in cinema or in books. I think actually, interestingly, a public library, I did Erasmus in Amsterdam when I was a student, and I lived about a 5-minute walk from the Amsterdam Public Library, and it was like this, 4 or 5 floors up of just books, and I would go there once a week I only had 1 or 2 classes, And I was always a big reader as a kid, but that year I just would sit around and just read for hours and hours every day, almost like a job. And I just kind of just blew my mind in a way. I was like, oh my God, I want to do this. And I didn't actually sit down to try to do it, but that was it. I kind of left that year with this kind of dream in my mind of that I would want to be a writer. And then there was a financial crash in Ireland. And basically Ireland went from being a boom town, it's very boom and bust, where you could just walk in and get a really good job, no questions asked, to half the population nearly being unemployed. I remember it was like literally queues for the dole, got like winding like a snake just around the streets. And I left to move to Spain, where the unemployment rate was even higher. I was planning to teach, but one of the benefits of it was I just had all this free time. I was like, all right, this thing that you say you want to do, let's just do it. And we just started to write. And slowly but surely, it went from a thing that I wanted to do, I want to be a writer, to just something that I did. I didn't know if it was gonna, and yeah, lots of knockbacks and ups and downs, yeah.
In the acknowledgements, you say that this took you 7 years to write, roundabouts.
Yeah.
What's something you wish you'd known at the beginning that you only found out painstakingly?
What would I wish I had known? I don't know. I think I don't really have any regrets in a way. Obviously, I wish it didn't take 7 years. But it wasn't 7 years. I took breaks. I wrote other things. I was working. One thing, I wrote a whole section from the Athenian perspective, like over 100 pages and more, and lots of research about that. And then at the end, I just had to press delete. And one of those but in a way, that's a lesson. In the painful lesson that you have is, just because I've written this and I've spent many hours doing it, does it serve the novel? Is the novel better? Is the story better with this in it? No, it isn't. Okay, it has to go. So, in a way, I'm glad I don't even know if I would change that. It was really painful at the time because it was months and months of work, but it was also a good lesson. And
whose perspective was it? Was it a character that we get to know in the current version?
It was from the dog's perspective.
Nice.
No, it was from the Athenian. There's an Athenian who gets killed in the first scene.
Yeah.
It was from his perspective.
Okay.
So it was like, which I actually like that idea that you have this character get killed and then you go back. But it didn't, as a whole, it didn't work for the story.
What did it just destabilize or make it lopsided somehow?
Well, basically, I wanted to tell a story of the Athenian invasion of Sicily. So you would go back and have this sense of when they're actually all like in their gleaming armor, right. This dual narrative, which dramatically sounds good. But I realized what it was is I wanted to tell a story of the Sicilian expedition, and someone else had already done a pretty good job of that, and that was Thucydides. So, in a way, what I was doing, because I love Thucydides so much, I was like, I want to do that, right. But it had already been done.
It's like fan fiction at that point.
Exactly. I was writing Thucydides fan fiction, yeah.
It's a popular, that's a hot genre right there.
Yeah.
Do you recall your first encounter with the classical world?
What was my first encounter? I think it was in school, and there was a book about the Greek gods and goddesses. And I was just fascinated. In a way, it's almost like Marvel Comics, isn't it? It's like little superheroes, and they all have their attributes and their backstories. And what I loved about the Greek myths was it was like this giant web of narrative, and a character that was the main protagonist in one myth would be in the background in another, and a character that was very noble and impressive in one section, you might see them down the line and they would be villainous or pathetic. Also quite like Irish mythology. So in Irish mythology, one of the great heroes is Fionn McCool, and you see him as a young boy. And then at the end of the mythological cycle, he's this, completely kind of corrupt old man trying to basically marry a much younger woman, and the story switches. This is a bit of a tangent. It's only to say what I enjoyed was it gave you a sense of we sympathize with characters. That the complex characters who were good, bad, but always compelling, and that we sympathize with someone not necessarily because they're good or noble, but because we understand them. Right. And that was in the Greek myths. It was also in the Irish myth.
There's a sense that you might have like kind of smuggled an Irish mythological character into this book slightly, in the figure of the patron, whose name is I'm going to butcher this.
Turin.
Please do it for me, okay? And there's a sense that maybe he's an Irishman, possibly, right, or sort of from that neck of the woods, and he traffics in magic and strange oddities.
He's from Dublin. He's from Cork.
He's from Cork. Ireland obviously does have one of the more robust literary traditions in the English language. Are Irish writers of special importance to you, or would you say you derive more from other traditions?
They are, yeah. I love Irish literature, definitely. So Joyce, I love Beckett. They were Sean O'Casey. Now you've got like Anne Enright, Claire Keegan, Roddy Doyle. So I think there's a very rich literary tradition in Ireland, and that's inspiring. Russian literature was really important to me. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Chekhov, they were really, something about those writers massively resonated with me and was a big influence. But I read out, all sorts, yeah.
Do you have a favorite work of Irish fiction?
Sounds really cheap. Like Ulysses probably, I think, it's like some sections of Ulysses are just like almost unreadable, incomprehensible, or very difficult that I don't enjoy. But the things I do enjoy about Ulysses are almost as good as anything I've ever read, and I've never read anything else quite like it. So yeah.
I felt like I caught slight whiffs of Joyce in the Lampo character just when he finally gets like a little bit of money and he just immediately goes out and blows it all. That felt very like Joyce would have like a single pound to get groceries and he'd come back with like a silk scarf for his wife or something.
Yeah, completely. And also I love that thing of like Dubliners is this realist, these really contained, precise works of short fiction, as good as any short fiction I've ever read. And then you go to Ulysses, which is just this mad, wild, imperfect, wonderful kind of thing.
Yeah. You mentioned the influence of cinema a few times. I want to follow up a kind of throwaway remark you made in another interview, actually. Sorry to hold you accountable here for your words, but at some point you were discussing the influence of cinema, and you cited Sergio Leone as one of your favorite filmmakers, director of spaghetti westerns like Once Upon a Time in the West, The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. And you said that watching spaghetti westerns helped you indirectly with this book. I'm curious what you meant by that, if you can recall.
Yeah. So one of the things that there's lots of things about the spaghetti western. So they made everything very gritty and odd, uncanny almost. They weren't shot in America. They were shot in Almeria mostly, in the south of Spain, and yet it feels almost more quintessentially American than the things that are shot in America. The characters are very flawed. They're, as you say, they're unheroic, or they're anti-heroes. It was taking the most common, well-known American cinematic genre, the Western, turning it on its head, presented it in such a way that it was completely unfamiliar, yet probably, given what we know about the ancient West and how rough and dark and gritty that period was, probably in many ways more true to the spirit than the typical John Wayne Western that we were more used to. So I like that idea of bringing you the familiar in an unfamiliar way, jolting the reader, and yet if you peeled it back, there was a lot of research that went into this, so that if you peeled it back, what you might see as shock value is to a point. So even though I think most people would never think of Sergio Leone when they read my books, it was almost like a kind of tuning fork indirectly.
Interesting, yeah. The Quarry kind of seems like maybe a Sergio Leone set in a way. That sort of barren, bright, feels very bright coming off the screen sort of image.
Completely. And when I traveled around Greece, I went to Sicily, I went to the quarries to research the novel, traveled around Greece, and it did remind me almost of a spaghetti western. You kind of know Greece is arid, but when you're there, you're like, this is an arid environment. Like, this is inhospitable. Beautiful, stunningly beautiful, but hard.
Writing a novel often, feels like you're paying tribute to the books that you love or the films that you love. And in a way, they're also a way of critiquing the books that we love by showing that they've missed or overlooked something, and we're filling that gap. What did you feel had been missing from historical fiction when you went to write this book?
I just felt it needed me. They needed. Now, what did I don't know. Like, I love Hilary Mantel. I love many historical fiction writers. What did I feel? I felt what was missing was more specifically in depictions of ancient Greece. I felt like there was a set. I loved the work of Mary Renaud, Last of the Wine, The Mask of Apollo. And even though I loved those books, they were written in that kind of formal, almost Downton Abbey. They were always about the elites. They were always about the aristocrats. They always did that thing where famous figures kind of moved in and out. Here's Socrates, here's Pericles, and they were excellent books. But the very fact that there was that threat, I wanted to do something different. And yeah, I think in a way, historical fiction, if it does there maybe is a tendency to set things from the perspectives of the most famous characters. In a way, what Hilary Mantel does, even though it's about, Henry VIII is a focal point, the genius kind of masterstroke is taking something that, again, is very familiar, Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, but reframing that from the perspective of Thomas Cromwell. So suddenly this story that we all know very, very well actually becomes completely fresh by that switch in perspective. And Cromwell, if you've ever seen like Man for All Seasons, a great kind of film, but in that Thomas Cromwell is just like a mustache twirling villain. He's got no real complexity, humanity. So yeah, I think in writers like that, they kind of showed me a path, which I suppose is to, if you are going to go to familiar material, find a way to make it different.
At the center of the book is this friendship between these two guys. What are some of your favorite, like, sort of literary friendships or cinematic friendships that maybe provided a model for this?
Sounds silly, like Don Quixote. I read that when I was a teenager and I absolutely loved it. I just found it really funny. First half hilarious, surreal, and then the second half heartbreaking. I love Roddy Doyle. The Van, I think, is a great depiction of male friendship. What else? There's so many. Whitnale and I is a movie. I don't know if anyone famous. Yeah, that's a great movie. And also, what I like about I love Monty Python. I love a good surreal comedy. But even maybe my favorite is that comedy where it comes out of a psychologically credible character behaving the only way that they can. And I think Whitnale and I is a great example of that. Like, the characters are very believable, even if they're extreme. And what that allows is 1 minute it's hilarious and then it's actually quite sad. So that was.
When the audience finally convenes in the quarry to watch this performance, this double feature essentially is what they're doing of Medea and the Trojan women, Lampo comments upon how not since the war have so many Athenians and Syracusans been together, sharing a space, holding in suspense the outcome of this performance in the novel. Do you believe that art has this power to unite enemies, even fresh enemies?
No.
Okay. And we're done here tonight.
Do I believe? I think art has tremendous power. because it can change the way people feel and it can change the way people think. And rather than just presenting a rational argument, it proves it in another way, through drama, through characterization. These ancient plays also were almost more akin to musicals. They had a musical component. And music has an incredible ability to kind of move individuals. So I think art does, it changes the world because it changes individuals. And it can change, and individuals can change other individuals. So yeah. And I think it isn't necessarily just a force for good. If you can change people's minds for the better or for the worse. But yeah, I think it does have that power, and it also has its limitations, which are. So this novel, in some ways, is about the power of art, but also maybe the limitations and and what it can achieve, and sometimes what it can't achieve, but maybe the value despite that. So even if you don't necessarily succeed in your ambition, was the effort worth it? And even if who knows, not to give too many spoilers of what happens in the performance, but who knows the impact that a performance like that might have in the long term, rather than just what the immediate impact of it is.
That's wonderful.